PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. Exciting things happening in the US Women's Championship, where Carissa Yip started with 8 wins out of 8. If she were to win the final 3 games, she would get a bonus prize of $64,000, along with the $35,000 already on offer for the first prize. So, quite an incentive for her in these final 3 games. She's already the reigning US Women's Champion, and she's on great form. She won gold medal playing on board 2 at the recent Olympiad in Budapest. So could she do it? Let's have a look at her round 9 game against Megan Lee. So Carissa playing white, and it's a Gioco Piano, and it follows very much along the lines a strategy that I've been recommending and highlighting over the past year. This early pin with bishop g5, and this is a little bit problematic for black. Notice the bishop can't get back to e7 to break that pin. So what does black do? Well, the obvious thing is to push. Of course, white does not want to take here and give up the 2 bishops, but it's all about provoking black into playing g5. So first of all, a6, that bishop is tucked out of the way in the corner. Knight d2, all normal so far. Bishop e6, very important for black to neutralize that powerful bishop. b4, yeah, nice to gain some space on the queen side. And you never know, black might sometimes castle queen side, so it's good to have b4, b5 ready. Castles. Now, this is a really important position where black has to decide what to do. Do you break this pin with g5? Do you just castle? Interesting to see Carlsen in his recent match in Paris against Alireza Firouzja exchanged here and played queen e6. Now, it didn't solve all his problems, but it did step out of that pin. But Megan Lee decided to just play the most straightforward way and break the pin. Really double-edged position now. And then castled kingside. So b5 was played, just pushing that knight to an awkward square. And then rook e1. So this is a really important part of white's strategy, that the rook makes room potentially for that knight to come round to e3, where it's looking at that key f5 square. That's the square that white wants to occupy with the knight, and that's why g5 was provoked. It means that that f5 square is permanently weak. Of course, if black could cheat and just put that pawn back 1 square, that would be very desirable. But then the bishop would probably come here anyway, so okay, forget that. An exchange on b5 and then knight d7. So this bishop returns to the fray. Now in this case, knight f1 not so good, because then black would exchange here and play knight c5, and there's pressure on e4, not so good. So d4 played, advancing in the middle, which looks very logical. I mean, you can see all these 3 pieces trained on e5. So there's real pressure there. So in exchange on d4, well, that's pretty much what white wants, of course. Knight takes d4, and you can see that that knight is looking not just at the bishop on e6, but that key f5 square. So things are working out pretty well for Carissa at the moment. An exchange on c4. Now, not possible to take here because of the pin. That's why the rook moved to e1, or one of the reasons anyway. And rook e8 played. So just a little bit more pressure on e4. That's something that white has to take care of now. So, how should white play this? Well, if you move in too quickly with knight f5, then queen e6, and that attacks the knight. That's a little bit annoying. Yip decides to play f3 to solidly protect that pawn on e4. Fair enough. But this does give black a chance to break. It might be more canny to put the knight back to defend this pawn because it keeps that diagonal closed. This is a potential problem, that bishop lurking in the corner. And yeah, I think d5 would have been a very interesting counter shot here, and queen c5. That's just a really messy position, with this pin here and that pawn vulnerable. So instead, black played knight e5 and knight e3. So actually, things have worked out very well for white here. That knight is in the perfect position, controlling the two outposts on f5 and d5. So yeah, where there's a pawn on e4 like this, those squares, these are the outposts. That's where that knight is so beautifully placed on e3. And now h4. Okay, why not chip away at the kingside? And then an exchange on g5 and knight f5. Looking pretty nice for white. I'm going to come back later and I will discuss some of these moves, but I want to zip through the game. So knight h5, bishop h2, and bishop c5. That knight is absolutely beautiful on f5, but black also has chances, as I mentioned earlier, with that pawn on f3. Then this diagonal is open. I realise the knight is blocking on d4, but still, it doesn't make manoeuvring so easy for white. An exchange of rooks, and then f4. So Yip is really going for it on the kingside. And a very interesting move. Instead of exchanging here, which would certainly open things up for white very nicely, Lee plays f6. Good move. So temporarily giving up a piece, but there's this pin, which is very uncomfortable. King h1, stepping out of the pin, that's understandable. So the piece has been recovered, material is still even, but this one's not so clear. Yeah, very nice to step into the line of black's king, but rook h8, look at white's king. Now this is a serious counterattack. King g1 should be played here. Not easy to step into the bishop's diagonal, and in fact after knight g7, g4 and an exchange here, this is still a very double-edged position. The rook is on an open file. There is pressure on d4, but white does have a center. My computer tells me it's roughly level, but I think I might prefer to be black in that position. In any case, rook f1 was played, and that is a mistake, because after this, white is in massive trouble. So the queen is attacked. If queen c4, then queen h7, and that's a killer. So that's why the queen had to stay on the second rank, which means if queen h7, then g3 defends. But the problem is stepping back to d2 means that pawn on b5 falls, and now black is a pawn up. All black's pieces are active. White's king is still in trouble there and doesn't have a secure home, really. So this is just very promising for black, and there's a tempo here. And an immediate blunder from Yip. She played rook e1. Can still struggle on with rook d1, but black is definitely better there. But rook e1 played, an immediate blunder, bishop a5. A simple skewer, and that is the end of that, really. Game finished like this. King f8, a check, but that was blocked. And now, okay, black to play. You ever think, I'll have a drink, cheers, black to play and win. There's more than one winning move, but there's one way which is absolutely crushing, decisive, immediate. Black to play and win. Rook h2 check. Boom! Here, and it's force mate, basically. That was the final move of the game, because if king takes, and a simple checkmate with queen and knight. Very nice counter attack from black. And you have to admire Carissa Yip's courage in that game. She really went for it. However, there are a couple of moments that I want to highlight. So coming way back here, I mentioned at this moment, instead of f3, which is a little bit problematic, knight d2 would have kept white's positional advantage, with this knight potentially coming into f5, but also kept that f-pawn on f2 so the king is covered. That's one moment. This, for me, is absolutely crucial. At this moment, Carissa exchanged on g5 and then played the knight into f5. Would have been much more pragmatic, practical, to just play the knight into f5 without exchanging. Keep the tension. This is a really great example of how it can be very useful not to exchange. And after king g6, well, there's lots of moves for white. You don't have to take on g5. King h1. You see, black cannot use that h-file. It's closed. Or king h2 and rook h1 with the idea of bishop f2 and king g1. And in that way, you bring the rook into the game. Or maybe just bishop f2 in that position as well. But just keep that pawn on h4. It means the h-file is still closed. I mean, there were moments later on where white could have improved, but for me, that's kind of a fundamental choice here to exchange on g5, which just made the situation much more complicated, much more difficult for white's king. You have to tread so delicately after that. So, a great pity for Carissa Yip, who now has only 8 out of 9, but the point is she won't get to 11 out of 11, and that's 64,000 bonus. But she's still leading in the tournament. She's 1.5 points ahead of the next competitor, who is, let me see, yeah, Gulruch Begim Tokhionova. Apologies for butchering that. She's 1.5 points behind. So 2 rounds to go. I hope Carissa isn't too deflated. That's the danger in this, when this kind of thing happens. She still needs to secure first place. In the US Open Championship, Fabiano Caruana still leads. He's in a good position, but he had a bit of a scare against Wanda Liang in the last round, but he held the draw. But Caruana still leads. I'll report back on what's going on there very soon. Anyway, thanks for watching.